So I'm Sarah, and this is my Draw My Life. When I was little, I lived in Ohio, and when I was really little, the Nintendo came out, the original NES. And a whole bunch of my friends had it, and I didn't. And so it was actually something that made me really, really sad because whenever I would go to like a friend's house, I really only wanted to play the Nintendo. And after a very short time, my friends got not very appreciative of that and didn't really seem to like that the only thing I ever wanted to do at their house was play Nintendo. And so I remember one of my friends had a little brother who wanted to play Nintendo, and she had very little interest in it. She was my age and my grade, and so I would very frequently play with her brother, and on their Nintendo, and I think it was Adventure Island. That's what it was, which I even then didn't like the responsiveness of the controls, even though I didn't have any kinds of experience with video games. But anyway, so even though I didn't have a Nintendo, I did play other games, and in fourth grade, I remember we had an Apple IIe or something. It was ginormous, and I would play games on that, and they were like 5 1/4 inch floppies, like these really big discs. And so I would play like Think Quick and Gertrude's Secrets and Rita Rabbit and Oregon Trail, which was super fun, but I never ever won it. They always died. But I really did like hunting. Hunting was the best part of Oregon Trail, and so I would listen to the crappy music and the, I don't know, VGA maybe graphics. And anyway, it was a fun game. I really enjoyed it. So when I was in sixth grade, a little bit older, we had a computer at home that was a Tandy 2000, which if you have never heard of that, it's a brand that was, I think, owned by Radio Shack. It was like Radio Shack's computer brand. And so we had that at home, and like, I don't know what my dad did with it. I assume he had some reason to get it, but like my brother did some programming on it. When I was older, I did some programming. But I would play these little dinky games on there. They weren't like games that had brands. They were games that like some guy had made and like people gave to each other on discs and floppy disks. So I played some games on that were like, I remember there was one that was like, guess the animal. And so I would think of an animal, and it would ask me a bunch of questions like, does it fly? And I would just say yes or no. And then it would eventually like narrow down the set of animals that I had answered yes or no to. And it was kind of fun. And so then if you stumped it, it would be like, what was what question would have distinguished the animal that you were thinking of from the animal that the computer guessed. And then you'd like type the question, and so the game like got better over time because it would have these questions that it could ask to narrow down the animal. So it was kind of a neat game. I mean, for being the dawn of time. But I remember at some point we got a crappy Windows laptop and I say crappy, it was like a liquid crystal display, and I don't think it displayed color at all. It was like a black and white liquid crystal display, but it was running Windows, and so I played some games on that for a while, and it had this super slow refresh rate. I remember it was really frustrating to play any kind of game with motion because it just refreshed so slowly. And so then later we had another. We eventually had like a Windows desktop that, in retrospect, was also quite crappy. But at the time, it wasn't crappy. At the time, it was really awesome. And in particular, it was awesome because it had a CD-ROM, which was like the greatest. And I remember distinctly being on the bus with a friend of mine, and we were talking about like our computers. And she was rare at that friend because she was a girl who was also interested in playing computer games, and I didn't really know too many of those. But I remember, like, when she came home, or she was on the bus, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, we got a new computer, and it has a CD-ROM," and it was so exciting. Anyway, and so at that time, it was really common to see, like, right as CD drives became more popular, it became common to see at computer stores like CompUSA and Circuit City and other things like that. They would have these sort of cardboard displays that had a CD that had like 99 Windows shareware games that you could buy for like $5, and like they would be of varying quality. And so I played a whole bunch of games there. Sometimes they were just like utter garbage, but there were a bunch of really good ones like Jill of the Jungle and Stellar 7 and Hugo's House of Horrors, which was like a sort of text. It was sort of like a point and click adventure, but also like a text adventure, kind of like Zork, even though it had graphics. And it was really fun, and the graphics were just garbage by today's standards, but I really liked it, and you had to sort of like solve this adventure mystery. And then like Prince of Persia, which was also a really, really great game. And a whole bunch of them. And so I played a lot of just like completely random games that that are not particularly widely known unless you happen to have also played games from that specific era. And so eventually I did get a Nintendo, and I don't remember actually under what circumstances I did, which is kind of weird because I remember a lot of things about a lot of old video games, but I don't actually remember getting a Nintendo. But I know that eventually we did get one. And I remember also all this excitement that was happening when Super Mario Brothers 3 came out. And so I don't know if you've seen the movie The Wizard, which is like about the release of Super Mario Brothers 3. I feel like that sort of captures the enthusiasm that everybody had for that game at the time. But it was really, really exciting. And, you know, you'd see ads on TV. And I remember at one point we went to some sort of convention in our town. And looking back, I don't even know what it was, but it was some sort of convention where Nintendo, like official Nintendo representatives were there. And among other things, you could play Super Mario Brothers 3 before it came out and before it was released. And I remember they had these sort of big arcade cabinets. So I remember when my parents got Super Mario Brothers 3 for me, very clearly, because we had just finished dinner, and they asked me if I could get Dad's cookies out of the fridge, which were in like a plate with saran wrap over them. And so I opened the refrigerator and went to get the cookies. And if I'm not mistaken, I think I actually gave some kind of attitude about having to go and get the cookies. But anyway, then I opened the refrigerator and got the cookies, and the Super Mario Brothers 3 box was lying on top of the cookies in the refrigerator, and it was very exciting. And so. Anyway, so I was very happy to have had that game. But even before we had a Nintendo, I've always really liked video games, and even before we had the NES, I played Atari games a lot. And we had an Atari 2600 from, I don't know, I guess when my brother, like before I was born, that my brother played. Maybe when I was very young. But so we had a lot of games from him that I don't have very much recollection of us acquiring. It was just like this thing with these kind of crappy video games that was always around, and I could tell they were crappier than like the Nintendo, but it was still fun, and I still really liked them. But I remember that most of the games were my brother's, and so they were all like fighty games and spaceship games and racing games that as a young girl I was not that really interested in. I mean, I still played them, I still liked them, but I remember I got a Strawberry Shortcake game, which is just like a complete utter garbage game. And I also got Eggomania, which was another medium quality game looking back. But most of the games were just sort of like my brother's and had really preceded me. But when we moved to the Southeast in the 1990s, I remember that the guy who was driving the moving truck had this huge box of like 50 or 60 Atari games. It was a lot of games. And I'm not really sure what the story was on those games, but somehow he ended up selling them to my dad for like 20 bucks, I think, for the whole box. And so then all of a sudden I had like every Atari game. I don't actually know how many Atari games there were. I don't know how much every is, but I've actually, like, I would just go through these games and try and be like, oh, let's see if this one is fun. And if it was, I'd play it for a while. And if it wasn't, or I couldn't figure it out, I'd just take it out and move on to the next one. And so it took like that $20 box of games bought me so many hours of playtime. But I really liked Adventure, of course. If you played Nintendo, then or if you played an Atari, then you probably liked Adventure. And Pitfall 2, which are both great games, and like Q*bert and Burger Time and Centipede and Combat, which I never really enjoyed. I didn't like the whole like moving your shooting direction and moving your vehicle in like with two different controls. Anyway, but yeah, so if there is an old Nintendo, or if there's an old Atari game that is in any way popular, the odds are pretty good that I've played it, and probably for many hours, because I've played a lot of Atari games. As I said, we moved to the Southeast in the 1990s when I was about 10 years old. When I was 11 years old, we hadn't lived there for very long, I broke my hip. And it's kind of a long story, but basically I had this like thing that I was riding on in our driveway that had 4 wheels, and I put out my leg to stop me because I was going too fast, and anyway, I ended up breaking my hip, and it was really crappy. I remember I was like lying in the middle of the road, and they had to bring an ambulance, and I remember distinctly at the time lying there being in great pain on the ground in the middle of the road, and I remember when they came to like the ambulance people came to do their stuff, they just like cut through the side of my jeans, like on the outside from my ankle up to my hip, to do whatever they were, whatever emergency stuff they were going to do, which I barely remember because I was 11. But I remember being like, no, these are my jeans. These are the jeans that I like. But yeah. So it was pretty crappy. And I had to be in this body cast that went from like the middle of my waist all the way down to my right ankle, and then also down to my left knee, sort of like a pair of pants. And it sucked. And it sucked quite a bit. You may notice in my drawing here that I have drawn it backwards. It was actually my right leg that went all the way down to my ankle, not my left. But that was to keep my like hip and pelvis immobile. And so you may ask yourself, how do you get around like that? How do you do things? And the answer is you don't. You stay at home in a hospital bed. And it sucks. And so we had a hospital bed that it was in our living room, and I just stayed there, and it was pretty crappy, and it took about 6 weeks, which was about forever as far as I could tell. And during that time, of course, I couldn't go to school, so they had like some teacher who probably made extra money on the side coming out, and she would like collect all of my assignments from all of my teachers in all my classes, and then like bring the material home for me and help me do stuff if she could. She was an English teacher, and in retrospect, I don't think she was really qualified to give me that much instruction in a variety of the other subjects that I had. But fortunately, my dad was able to help me with most technical things, so that wasn't really a big issue. But anyway, so I was in this hospital bed for 6 weeks, and then we learned later that the doctor who had like fixed my hip hadn't really done it correctly, and that's like a whole separate thing that I won't bother going into in detail, but he hadn't really done it correctly, and so I ended up having to have another surgery to get that fixed. And then after that one, I was in the cast for 3 months, which was significantly more forever than 6 weeks had been forever. And so I also didn't enjoy that. And I mean, my parents did like a good job dealing with it and everything, and took care of me. But I mean, there was only so much enjoyment. There was only so much that like trying to make me feel better could do to really make my life happier. Being stuck in a body cast in the living room for 3 months, and also, I was in middle school and high school at that time, and although I had friends and good friends, most people couldn't drive, and we were out in rural Georgia, and so there wasn't really a lot of contact that I got from people. If I had lived in a place where, the kids from down the block could walk over, I probably would have had people coming over and people to hang out with. But it was kind of a lonely time because I didn't, because it really wasn't feasible to have, like, it wasn't easy to have people come over. And they're kids, they aren't, I think, like, if that happened to someone who is a friend as an adult, people would be like, oh, they're going to be down. We better make sure we prioritize going over and, seeing them and keeping their spirits up because it's our friend. But in, like, middle and, young high school, people just weren't like that as much. And so anyway, it was a pretty lonely time. So, however, during that period, the Super Nintendo came out. And so I got that Super Nintendo in, I guess, 92, I think it was, when it came out. And I played that thing like crazy because I was home. I didn't have anything to do except look at the TV, and it was really nice. It was a definite silver lining to the crappiness that was going on. And so during that time, I played Super Mario World, which is like the greatest game, and I played a lot of F-Zero, which I got. I didn't get Pilot Wings. I remember when like seeing the ads for Super Nintendo before it came out, being aware of Pilot Wings and being like, but I don't think I had any decision making in what games we got, because I think I just got for Christmas like the system and Super Mario World and F-Zero, so I didn't decide not to get it, but I have never played it, even though I'm sort of aware of it as a thing that existed. So having those games around definitely helped like the forever pass a lot more quickly than it otherwise might have. And then eventually I did finish being in the cast, and I was able to sort of go back to being a normal person at school. And in school, I had always been sort of big into a bunch of extracurricular activities. And so I was in band in middle school and elementary school, and then once I reached 8th grade, I joined the marching band. And of course, while I was out recovering, I wasn't doing a lot of marching band stuff. But eventually, I was able to go back to being a marching band, and in school, I did a lot of different stuff, like Science Olympiad and math team and academic team. And we were in a pretty rural area, and it was a pretty small school. And so I remember we were frequently called the Nerd Herd, which we didn't really mind, but I guess I find sort of irritating in retrospect. But I do distinctly remember one time a friend of mine got asked by a cheerleader, like, when you guys have parties, do you just like sit around and diagram sentences? And I don't actually remember what she answered, but it was sort of it was sort of a good commentary in a nutshell of how I think we were viewed by the rest of the school. But I enjoyed school. I enjoyed high school, and I had fun doing a lot of stuff like that. And so I played the flute, and then my senior year I was assistant drum major, which was really nice because I got all of the authority of being drum major, but none of the responsibility of having, or very little of the responsibility of being a drum major, because I think my obligations were like take attendance at the beginning of every practice. But other than that, I outranked like nearly everybody in the band, and so it was really nice because I used my powers for good and like enforced justice and stopped people from being dicks. And so I really enjoyed my little power that I had there. Oh yeah, but I did also sort of have a reputation as being a teacher's pet, and that was really fine with me. I was definitely a goody goody in high school. So eventually I finished high school and went to college. And I picked computer science because I had done pretty well on the advanced placement CS exam, and I liked computers, and I didn't really say like, oh, I definitely want to do computing stuff, but it seemed like a good field to be in, and I enjoyed it, and I like video games, and so it just seemed like sort of a natural choice, even though I wasn't like super motivated. Also in college, I was super political. My political affiliations have changed since then, but at that time I worked on a lot of political campaigns, and I was in college political groups, and I protested stuff, and I went door to door, I knocked on people's doors and tried to get them to support my candidate, and I registered people to vote, and I did stuff on local campaigns and like also major campaigns, and I would spend hours calling people asking for donations, and so it was kind of a satisfying thing to do because as an extracurricular activity, it felt very, like, I guess, morally satisfying. Like, it felt like I was working on something that I cared about, and it also seemed like a really good way to meet people who also had a similar view that I did sort of about the world. And so I made a lot of really good friends there, and had a lot of really, like, wonderful experiences that I look back on fondly, even though my politics are different now than they were then. But I spent a lot of time getting people registered to vote, or getting them to sign up for stuff, or to buy tickets to fundraisers. And I even did that actually later after I moved to Texas. But it's not very glamorous. You think of working on political campaigns and you imagine, I think a lot of people imagine themselves, doing awesome stuff and having clever conversations, and it's like being on the West Wing, except you're not in the White House. But it's actually very unglamorous because they need lots of people to do grunt work. And so, like, I remember there were a variety of occasions where I'd be working at some campaign headquarters, and someone would be like, okay, I'm here, what should I do? I have to go to class in 3 hours. And they'd hand me this printout of a spreadsheet that had like 1,000 names on it and phone numbers. And they would all be people who had like signed up on some list in the past, or had donated to a campaign of a similar politician, or somebody supporting a similar issue. And so then I would call them, and I would go through the script, and I would be like, hi, I'm Sarah, I'm calling from blah, 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 and I'm wondering if you would be interested in donating to blah, blah, blah. And you would just like talk to these people, and sometimes they would hang up on you, and sometimes they would just be like, why are you calling me? And sometimes they would be like, and actually what really surprised me about it is because we never like telemarketers in our house. And my dad was always kind of snarky to them on the phone. And so I really expected that a lot. And although I did get some of that, and it became kind of tiresome, I was actually really surprised at how many people would be like, oh, thank you for calling. Can you call me back at 9:30? Or they'd be like, oh, thank you for calling. I would like to buy some. Or oh, great. Can I can't talk right now, but I definitely want to, talk about this issue. And then they would talk to me, and then they'd buy whatever they were going to buy. And I was sort of surprised at how much that happened, although I guess it sort of makes sense because the list was people who had, donated to things in the past. But it was definitely sort of a unique experience. And one other thing that would happen is sometimes they would ask me for details on the issue, and so I had to be knowledgeable about whatever thing was being discussed, or they'd ask me, why should I support this issue, and I would explain it to them, and when I could, try to convince them or persuade them. But oftentimes the people that I was calling and for that kind of thing were already persuaded because they had already donated in the past. But anyway, it's not really fun to do that. Like, after a few people are mean to you or you get hung up on, it gets a little bit tiresome. But anyway, as I said, my politics have changed quite a bit since then, and so I don't really do a lot of political stuff anymore because there isn't really a candidate that embodies my views enough that I really feel motivated to want to give them my free time. Though if I found one, I would certainly be happy to do that. Also, while I was in college, I spent one semester doing the Walt Disney College program, which technically gave me like internship credit, but really shouldn't have because it offered no academic value whatsoever. I got to live on property at Walt Disney World, and like I worked there, and I went to like special classes there, and got to do a lot of behind the scenes stuff. And I'm a big Disney fan. I'm not like super into characters. Like, I don't ever go and get Mickey's signature, but I do enjoy like the park and the industrial engineering and sort of the like user experience that they provide. And so it was a fun time to work there, and I really look back on that time with fondness, and I really like Disney World a lot. So that was really cool. And on a side note, if you are a Disney person, if you really like Disney World, I highly recommend the college program. If you can figure out a way to get college credit for it. It may have changed now, but back when I did it, it was pretty easy to get credit if you had a major that was in any way related to it, like marketing or hospitality, or pretty much anything where you could make a case that working at Walt Disney World would give you benefit. There were people who just had like business degrees. So side note, it was really fun. I highly recommend it. I also did an internship at a company in Texas, and before I finished, and then eventually I graduated. And it was really nice to be done with school and to be out in the world. So after I finished my degree, I moved to Austin, where I had done that internship before my last semester. And when I moved there, I had actually dated the same guy all through college and was now sort of newly single through mutual dissatisfaction with the relationship. And like neither of us really wanted to do long distance now that I was going to Texas, and Texas was really far away. And I was a little bit nervous about going there. Like when I was finishing my last semester, like I had the job offer and I knew I was going to go to Texas, but I was a little bit nervous because I didn't have any friends or family there. I just had like the girlfriend of this guy that I had been friends with in the Disney College program, but I had like met the girlfriend like twice ever and for 5 minutes, and so she was the only person that I knew in Texas. And I had all these wonderful friends from college, and my family was there, and so I was a little bit. I knew it was going to be hard to move and like leave the place that I had known so well. I really didn't want to be the kind of person who was afraid to go to some new place and have like that kind of life adventure. But as it got closer, I guess I had underestimated how hard it would be. And so I remember as it got really close, in the last week or two, and I was saying goodbye to people, I was thinking like, maybe I shouldn't go. Maybe I should just try to get a job here in Georgia, like the way a lot of my friends have. And so I played a lot of Return to Castle Wolfenstein in this period. I really, really liked it. It was my first FPS, and the guy that I had dated in college had really introduced me to FPS as a genre, and that was the only one I had played. But I spent so many hours in my apartment in Austin playing Return to Castle Wolfenstein. Like multiplayer online, and also Enemy Territory, which is another game that's like it's got sort of an interesting history that I won't bother going into, but it's basically the same game as Return to Castle Wolfenstein. And so I would play this online multiplayer, and I really, really liked it. They had these sort of fun missions where you had to, like blow up the wall to break into the Nazi headquarters and steal the plans from the radio room, and then, get the plans back to the Allied base and to their radio room and send them to the good guys. And so they always had these sort of fun missions where you could really reason about like what the other people on the team were going to do, and you could try to outsmart people, and I really, really liked it. And I actually really wanted to be a medic there, but because of the way the game worked, it medics didn't get very much, or they only got one like gun's worth of ammo, and they could produce infinite health packs, but they couldn't produce their own ammo. And so if you wanted to be a medic, you really had to have a field ops, who was another class in that game, who could produce an unlimited amount of ammo packs, but they couldn't produce any health. And so if you really wanted to be a medic, it was completely non-viable unless you had someone who was going to be a field ops who was going to like act like a team, and people didn't really act like a team very much on there, and so I rarely got to be a medic, but on once in a while I did, and it was really, really fun. And so I think that had really sort of set the stage for me wanting to play Mercy and being enticed by that when Overwatch came out. Also, I've got to say that, like, looking at what I've drawn here, I feel like it wasn't really a broken-hearted situation when I moved to Texas. Like, I was newly single at age like 24 for the first time since age 19. So it was a pretty big change for me, and I felt like I had sort of developed as a person alongside this guy, and so it was definitely like a personal challenge for me to be like, who am I, and what are the things, that I want to do now that I'm not sort of the person that I was only with this guy. And so it was definitely like a big sort of epoch in my life, like a big moment to have this transition, but it wasn't really a brokenhearted kind of transition. So also around this time, I discovered the Barbershop Quartet community. And if you've watched many of my streams, you know that I love Barbershop Quartets. And so just a brief explanation of what they are. A Barbershop Quartet is a group of 4 people, usually men, who sing harmonies together, and they don't have any instruments. They only use their voice, no other like music or percussion. And they sing certain kinds of harmonies. And so if you know anything about music theory, they use certain kinds of chords like ninths and 13ths that sort of have a distinctive barbershop sound. And so I've always really liked barbershop quartet music. I learned about it when I first watched the movie The Music Man from 1963, starring Robert Preston. And that movie was based on a very successful Broadway show that had a barbershop quartet in it, and was started by, like, the show was written by a guy named Meredith Willson, who was a big barbershopper. And so I had watched that when I was a child, and I really, really liked that music. I thought it was just great. And I remember even in college, I used like Napster to get a bunch of barbershop quartet MP3s. But it still hadn't really occurred to me that like there is a place in the world that maybe someone is actually performing and creating new barbershop quartet music. It was just like this thing that was from this movie and from like a long time ago, and I didn't really know anything about it. But the reason I talk so much about this now is because the barbershop quartet community is like a huge, huge part of my life, and relative to that, you guys don't really hear me talk about it very much. Although if you watched my my vlogs while I was at the barbershop quartet convention this past July, maybe you know a little, are able to see a little bit more how much of a part of my life it is. But it's something that makes me really, really happy, and I spend a lot of time on every year. Back to Austin in, I guess, 2006 or 2007, something like that. The moment that I really discovered the barbershop quartet community, I feel like it's sort of this cherished memory for me. I was eating lunch at a Mexican restaurant with my coworkers on Valentine's Day, and as I think about it, team was actually a pretty unhappy work environment, and so probably all these people weren't smiling that much. But we were sitting there, and we were just eating our Mexican food, and I remember hearing like, almost like when you see in those old cartoons where someone puts an apple pie on the windowsill and the smoke or the steam from the apple pie comes like swirling around and goes into like Tom and Jerry's nose or whatever. It was almost like that, where I was sitting there, talking to my coworkers, and then from afar I could hear just the tiny, tiny little sweet strains of a barbershop quartet singing somewhere at the very periphery of my what I was able to perceive. And so I heard this, and I was like, just a second, you guys, I'll be right back. And I jumped up from the table, and I followed the sound in this crowded, loud Mexican restaurant. And eventually I went to this other room I came to this other room in the restaurant where there was an actual barbershop quartet standing there in the middle of this Mexican restaurant singing, I think, Let Me Call You Sweetheart to someone. And something that barbershop quartets do is around Valentine's Day, people will send singing telegrams or singing Valentine's. And then they'll be like, here's however much money, go sing a song to my girlfriend wherever she is. And so someone had paid this quartet to go and sing to some girl who happened to be in this Mexican restaurant. And so I listened to them singing, and I had this huge grin on my face. And I was like, who are you guys? Like, where can I hear you sing? Oh my gosh, this is amazing. And they were like, oh, we sing out of this group in Central Texas, and it's the Barbershop Quartet thing, and you should come to. We're having a district convention coming up in the spring, and you should come and listen to us, or you should come and listen if you like Barbershop Quartet music. It's happening about 40 minutes from here. And so I was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And so I got home and I looked it up, and so I went to that event coming in, which was I think in March, and it was really great. It was all these like barbershop quartets who were competing, and everybody there is just like warm and wonderful and friendly, and like the barbershop quartet community is just so many wonderful people. They're all just so nice. And anyway, and so I went to that convention, and then when I was there, I was talking to someone who was sitting in the theater near me. I went alone, and I just talked to some guy, and he was saying, well, if you like this, you should come to the international convention that is happening in Nashville in over the 4th of July. And so I was like, well, maybe I should. And so I looked at it, and and the other thing he said was, yeah, every quartet that you'll see there will be better than every quartet you've seen tonight. And I remember thinking, that can't possibly be true. Like, there's no way that can be true. And so eventually I decided that I was going to go to Nashville, and I did go to the convention, and it was amazing, and he was right, and they were all the best. And basically, to make a long story slightly less long, I've gone to every barbershop quartet convention ever since then, and I probably always will, unless I'm beset by some other condition or affliction that prevents me from going. So anyway, that's sort of how I discovered that this community was there. And in retrospect, it's like, well, sure, of course people are doing this somewhere, but I just didn't really think about it as a thing that was happening that I could ever be involved in or be able to experience myself. So it was really neat. So eventually, Mr. Sarah and I moved to California, although that's actually not entirely accurate, because we actually moved to Seattle before then, and we lived in Seattle for a year, but like a year isn't long enough for me to justify drawing the state of Washington. So we moved to Seattle, and then a year later we moved to California. And that actually reminds me, I did leave out a very important event. I met Mr. Sarah while I lived in Texas, and we met using online dating. I online dated pretty hard after I sort of had gotten used to being single again. And so we met on OkCupid, which is the best of all the online dating sites, and for a variety of reasons. And so so we got married in Texas, and then we moved to Seattle shortly after that, like just a few months later after getting married, and then moved to the Bay Area. And when we got married, we were in the state park in Texas, and it was really nice, and we were out in the woods, and it just went off exactly the way I wanted it to. It turned out really nicely, and I don't know, I guess maybe everybody likes their wedding, so that's not exciting information. But I really liked it. I look back on my wedding with great fondness, and everything went off just the way I had hoped. And so after we got married, we moved to Seattle for a year, just a few months later, and then we moved to the Bay Area. And so I had a couple tech jobs down here in the Bay Area, and then I guess in 2016, Overwatch came out, and I had heard about it when they released the original cinematic in 2014 or whenever that was, the one in the museum with the little boys. I was like, this game looks amazing, and I really, really can't wait for it to come out. And then I sort of forgot about it for a while, because it was like, oh my God, isn't that, whatever that game was, is that ever going to come out? And I was sort of concerned about it, because I didn't have a gaming computer at that time. I didn't have any kind of machine, like a Windows machine. I'd had Windows machines previously, but at previous jobs I had gotten used to using a MacBook for a lot of the things, the tasks that I do at work. And so I had a MacBook, and it didn't seem worth having a Windows machine. And so that was actually kind of a big problem for me, because I was really, really bad at first-person shooters. Well, I remain really, really bad at first-person shooters using a console control. And so I saw this game, and I was like, this looks amazing. And I was sort of like also slightly filled with dread because I knew I was going to want to play it, but I didn't think that I would be very good at it with a console controller, and I was like, well, I'm not going to buy a computer to use just to play this one game that I might not even like that much. And so it just sort of seemed like there was no real viable option there. And so I was still really excited, but also it was kind of bittersweet because I didn't really see a solution. Because we weren't going to just like drop a whole bunch of money on a gaming computer. But eventually it came out, and I played it in the open beta, and I played it on the PS4, and I was a garbage shot, and so I played Mercy mostly because I couldn't shoot for crap, but I could hold the beam on someone and, you know, not have to aim, and so playing it that 4 days or a week or however long it was that it was an open beta. I was like, this is incredible. And I tried to get in the closed beta, but I couldn't. I mean, they didn't pick me. But I was like, this is amazing. This is incredible. And I just played it like nonstop during the whole beta. And so as it had happened sort of in the lengthy intervening time between the game being announced and the open beta happening, we had sort of generated more need in our household to have a powerful Windows computer for sort of some other professional purposes. And so we decided that we were going to get a nice powerful computer, and then we could use it for these other purposes, and we could also use it for Overwatch, and then it was going to be really great. And so at that point I was already sold on the game, and I felt a little bad, like, well, you know, we're getting this powerful computer, but we do need it anyway for these other reasons. And so anyway, so then we got a gaming computer, and then I played Overwatch, and I fell in love with it even more, and then I started streaming, and then I started to meet all of you guys, and you wonderful, wonderful people. And so I guess that about brings us up to today, or at least to where I started my channel. And I've met so many wonderful people through my channel, much more so than I ever expected. I started streaming because I was playing, and Mr. Sarah was like, "Oh, you're pretty good. You know, I think you should stream. I think people would want to watch you." And I was like, "Nobody wants to watch me. That's like, that can't. I don't think so." And but eventually he prevailed upon me to try. And so I just sort of started, and I didn't really have a goal, and it wasn't like, I'm going to have a community, and I'm going to have a Discord server, and I'm going to sell merchandise. Like, I never really went into it with that in mind. And sort of at every stage where those things happened, I was like, wow, I guess I've got this now. Like, I have a store where I sell shirts, and I have a server where people hang out, and like people want to come and watch me. And so it's been sort of a surreal journey. And I couldn't have done it without you guys, and in particular I couldn't have done it without all the people who have so kindly donated both their time and their money and their energy to the community. Not just my Patreon supporters, who of course I continue to have great gratitude for. Also, I should call out before I forget the people who specifically donated to this video, and I was not smart enough to write their names down a million years ago when that happened, because when those donations happened, because I did not anticipate that the Draw My Life would be as much work as it was. And so I was like, oh, I'll be doing it next month, and I'll remember whose names it is. But now it's been like a million years, and so I don't remember the names of everybody specifically, but you know who you are. And even if you didn't donate to this, but have donated to other things, like, it all goes in the same bucket, and I so appreciate it. Anyway, I guess that's all. My community couldn't be what it is without all of the wonderful people who are in it, because I feel like it just sort of fell in my lap, and we've all sort of found each other and created these really nice relationships, and it really means a lot to me. And so thanks, you guys. I guess that's all. The end.